How the world's greatest power became history's largest drug syndicate empires are remembered for what they build. Roads that still exist, institutions that still function, languages that still shape thought. History praises what survives, but civilizations are rarely destroyed by what they build. They are destroyed by what they justify. In the 19th century, Britain stood at the center of the world. Its ships controlled the seas. Its merchants controlled trade. Its diplomats spoke as if morality itself had a flag. Britain did not describe itself as violent. It described itself as necessary, necessary for order, necessary for progress, necessary for civilization. And yet, beneath this self-image, beneath the speeches, the sermons, the parliamentary debates, flowed a substance that hollowed out one of the world's oldest civilizations, not by accident, not by crime, but by policy. This is not a story about addiction. It is a story about power. Because the largest drug syndicate in history did not hide in alleyways. It did not operate illegally. It did not fear arrest. It wore uniforms. It wrote laws. It sailed under a national flag. To understand how this became possible, we must begin not with opium, but with money. By the early 1800s, Britain had transformed itself. The Industrial Revolution had turned coal into capital and factories into engines of global dominance. But empire is not sustained by pride. It is sustained by balance sheets. Britain imported vast quantities of Chinese goods, tea for its population, silk for its elites, porcelain for its markets. China, meanwhile, wanted almost nothing Britain produced. The Qing Empire viewed itself as complete, self-sufficient, the center of the civilized world. Britain paid in silver, and the silver kept flowing east. Year after year, Britain's reserves drained into China, creating a trade imbalance that no amount of rhetoric could disguise. This was not a moral problem, it was a strategic one. Empires can survive cruelty. They cannot survive imbalance. British merchants and officials began searching for a commodity, any commodity, that China could not refuse. And they found one. The East India Company did not appear threatening. On paper, it was a trading firm. In reality, it was a state. It had its own army, its own courts, its own tax collectors. In India, it ruled tens of millions of people directly, often more directly than the British Crown ruled Britain itself. After the conquest of Bengal, the company gained control over fertile land and an enormous rural population. It also gained control over opium production. At first, opium had been cultivated in small quantities, used as medicine and ritual substance. The company changed that. It standardized cultivation, forced farmers to grow opium instead of food, fixed prices, centralized processing. Opium became a system. Every poppy harvested was recorded, every shipment was logged, every transaction approved. This was not smuggling, this was bureaucracy. Opium was auctioned publicly in India, then sold to private merchants who transported it to China. Officially, Britain could claim distance. Unofficially, everyone understood. The state had built the pipeline. Merchants merely operated within it. The results were immediate. Silver began flowing back to Britain. The trade imbalance reversed. Empire stabilized, and China began to weaken. The damage was not instant. It was gradual. Addiction spread quietly, first among elites, then soldiers, then laborers. Work discipline eroded, families collapsed, local economies destabilized. Officials, meant to enforce the law, became users themselves. China did not lose a war first. It lost coherence. The Qing state attempted reform. It issued bans, confiscated opium, punished dealers. And then, in 1839, China made what Britain considered an unforgivable mistake. It enforced its own law. Chinese authorities seized and destroyed massive quantities of British-linked opium in Canton. Britain responded, not with diplomacy, but with war. The Opium Wars were not fought for territory. They were fought for access. British gunboats forced Chinese ports open. Advanced naval firepower crushed outdated defenses. This was industrial warfare used to protect narcotics distribution. When China lost, Britain did not apologize. It dictated terms. Treaty ports were opened. Tariffs were fixed in Britain's favor. Hong Kong was seized, and opium trade was legalized. China had not only been defeated, it had been compelled to accept its own poisoning. This was humiliation on a civilizational scale. Britain justified its actions with language, free trade, open markets, economic modernization. At home, opium was restricted. Abroad, it was enforced. The contradiction was not accidental, it was strategic. Britain had discovered a principle empires would repeat for centuries. What is immoral domestically can be profitable abroad, if power protects it. Missionaries objected. Some politicians protested, but prophets spoke louder than sermons, and the empire continued. Over time, opium revenue became indispensable. It funded colonial administration, it stabilized currency, it underwrote military expansion. The British Empire did not collapse because it sold drugs. It flourished because it did. But something else happened. China's internal collapse accelerated. Rebellions erupted. The Qing dynasty weakened irreversibly. What followed would be remembered as the century of humiliation, not because China was conquered, but because it was hollowed out. Empires rarely fall when exposed. They fall when their contradictions become unsustainable. Britain eventually moved on. Global power shifted, formal empire dissolved, but the system remained. Corporate interests aligned with state power. Economic coercion replaced overt conquest. Moral language masked structural violence. The opium empire ended. The logic did not. History prefers simple villains, smugglers, criminals, addicts. But the most destructive systems are rarely illegal. They are legalized, normalized, justified. The British Empire did not teach the world how to build institutions. It taught the world something more dangerous. That power, once justified, does not need morality, and civilizations that forget this lesson do not collapse suddenly. They decay, quietly, systematically, legally. The question is not whether empires will rise again. The question is whether they will find a different justification for the same methods.